Greetings, everybody. Welcome back. Episode number 6 of this, course where we are talking about integration testing and unit testing in React applications. In this video, I'm going to add a couple of more functionalities to our application, which will allow us to explore some other, concepts and options when it comes to testing. So before we can continue with the testing, first, we need to add these functionalities to our application. And as I have told you before, I assume that you are already familiar with React. So for example, adding the edit and delete functionalities to our application with our local data, like an array of employees, is going to be very easy for you because you already know about React, right? So if you need to learn more about, for example, these concepts, there are other videos, playlists on my channel that you can take advantage of. But here, as I have told you before, I'm assuming you are already familiar with these concepts. With that out of the way, let's talk about the thing we are going to implement here. First, we are going to modify the employee list component because we want to be able to have these two functionalities, editing an employee and deleting an employee. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this and then implement the code. So basically what we are doing here, if you take a look, for each employee that we are rendering two buttons, on edit and on delete. And then here we are, adding these to our props. And then whoever wants to use this employee list component is expected to pass in these two functions so that we can handle editing and deleting, with these two functions. So let me take you to Visual Studio Code. I'm going to move to my new branch, episode 6. And then inside our employee list, here, I'm going to remove this code and then I start writing the code for employee list so that we get the editing and deleting functionalities. It is very similar to what we previously had. The only difference is that in the props, we're going to get two new functions for handling adding an employee and deleting an employee and editing an employee. And then we're going to create the employee list component itself. We expect those props to be passed into the component. And for each employee, we are going to render the, edit and delete buttons. So this is the first thing that we need to do inside of our application. I'm going to move this guy here. So this is the first change. Now let me take you to my notes. The next change is going to be inside of app.tsx. So basically what we need to do is to track the employee that is being edited currently. When clicking the edit, we need to, populate the input fields with the data of that employee. And then we are going to be able to save the changes. So this is the code. As you can see here, we are creating this state, which is an array. So if you take a look at app.tsx, right now we do have this state, right? And we do have the ability to handle adding new employees. But inside of employee list, we now need to pass in, two extra functions for editing and deleting an employee. And of course, we need to track the employee that is being edited as well. These are the two functions that are going to handle adding an employee and deleting an employee. For, editing an employee, we're going to set editing employee to the employee that is being passed in. This is the you know this is a state that we are maintaining here, as you can see here, right? The add is already there. For deleting an employee, if you take a look, we are getting the ID of that employee, and we are removing that from our employees array, and then we are setting the editing employee state to null. We also have update. If you take a look, we are updating a new employee based on the ID of the employee that we are receiving here. So whenever we get the employee form, we're going to talk about the employee form, by the way. So employee form is going to enable editing. We're going to talk about that as well. But for the employee list, if you take a look, we are passing the list of employees. We are passing the editing function as well as the deleting function, right? Now let me take you to my code here and then start writing the code for the app.tsx. As before, we're importing the state, the list, employee list, and employee form. And then we also need employee type. Then we want to create the state, which is going to be an array of employee objects. We want to track the employee that is being edited currently. We want to be able to handle add. We want to be able to handle edit. We're going to set the state, set editing employee, and then for delete, we are going to delete an employee based on its ID from the array that is called employees, which is implemented as a state for the component. And then for update, we are going to update one full employee based on the ID of that employee. Now, the next step would be to create the actual template for the component. So employee form will need to be able to handle editing an employee, which we are going to implement now. And then for employee list, we will pass in these two functions, onEdit and onDelete. So this is the code that we have for the app component. Now we need to implement the employee form, because inside of employee form, as you can see, we are going to pass in a new prop called editing employee. This is the employee form. Now let's take a look here before we implement that. So we want to modify this. We want to receive props for editing an employee and for uncancel callback. If editing employee is set, then we need to populate the input fields and then show the update button instead of add, and then provide the cancel button when editing. So take a look here. Here we are receiving these props on cancel, editing employee, which is the employee that is being edited right now, and on add, right? And then here, if you take a look, here, one important thing is that based on whether we are editing an employee or adding a new employee, we are, rendering these two different pieces of text. We have the cancel button bound to that, prop callback on cancel. And then here we've got, different things. For example, we've got a use effect hook. We've got the handle submit. So handle submit, for example, is checking whether we are editing a new employee or we are adding a new employee, right? So these are all React stuff. And I told you, I expect that you already know what we are doing here. If that's not the case, no worries. You can, watch the other videos on my channel. I don't want to deal with React stuff because I want this playlist to be 100% focused on testing. And this is the setup that we need to have in order to, explore other options for testing React applications. Now, let me take you to employee form component. This is the current version of employee form. Right now, it only supports adding an employee, right? But we want to pass in, other props to be able to edit an employee as well. So I'm going to remove this, and then I'm going to write the code for this new version of the component. We need the type, employee, of course. We need our props, not only on add callback, but also editing employee, which is the employee that is being edited, and on cancel callback. Then we're going to create the component itself. The component is going to take in these different props. We're going to create local states for the name of the employee, the role and the department. Then we're going to create a hook. So if we are editing an employee, we're going to set the states, name, role, and department based on the data of that employee that is being edited. Otherwise, we're going to set these 3 states to empty string. The next step would be to create the handle submit for the form. So first, we're going to check whether we've got values inside of these. If not, we're going to return. Otherwise, we're going to check whether we are editing a new employee or not. If we are editing a new employee, we're going to, update the fields. Otherwise, we're going to call on add. So on add will either add or update, right? And if editing employee is null, we're going to set the states to null. And then we are going to return the template itself. So it's going to be a form. As before, with 3 inputs for name, role, and department. And then we have buttons for submitting, which is going to have 2 pieces of text, update employee or add employee, based on the value inside editing employee. And then another button for cancel. If editing employee has a value is truthy, we are going to render that button. And that's it for this episode. I know we haven't run the application up to this point, but that is not the focus of this code, of this course. The focus is going to be on unit testing and integration testing. Now that we have this setup in place for employee list, employee form, and app.tsx, we will have the opportunity to explore other options for writing unit tests and integration tests. So let's wrap up this video here and continue our discussion in the next one.